The modern world has really told everybody that, we live in a consumer society, you can have it your way. And I know as teaching economics for years, I kind of conveyed to people, consumer-based society, that's great. Everybody gets to have what they want, and the market will give you what you want. Well, that doesn't really work in the family. It doesn't really work, and there's a whole sphere of human endeavor where that it's not right to apply that.
Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, thanks for sitting down.
I'm happy to be here and join you with this. This is a great little studio that you have here, and it's great to see you again.
Yes, it's been a little bit.
I know, it's kind of crazy. I was thinking about it. I met you when you were still an undergraduate at UCLA, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
I think it would have been around 2008,
That's
something
correct.
like that.
Yes.
Yeah, we met at something around the UCLA campus. I think I had just started the Ruth Institute, and I think you were about to become a Catholic, if I remember correctly.
So.
Something like that.
A big moment.
Right.
Yeah.
But of course, I've been following you and your progress all right along. Yeah.
Well, you too.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of progress to talk about. There's a lot that's happened since then. 2008. We're 15 years now ago.
That's
amazing.
Right. So my kids have left home, and you have.
I have kids.
And you have kids now, which you didn't have before.
What's that like to have them leave home? Everyone says it's a big.
Well, it's weird. It's definitely weird, but you get over it. It's fine. We're all good.
They come back and visit, right?
Yeah, and they're doing well, so that's all good. That's what's supposed to happen.
Yes.
So.
Well, I've got a few more years, many more years left, but.
Well, you're in the fun years, Lila.
Oh, fun. Okay.
Yeah, these are
I know it is fun.
No, definitely. These are the fun years when they're little. And a friend of mine once said, the days are long, but the years are short.
That's what they say. But we're really enjoying it.
That's good.
We really are, because they're so fun.
Yeah.
They're learning to talk, learning to walk, and it's just like, it's magical. Every day is a new adventure.
Right.
So I'm loving it.
Good.
So when you started Ruth Institute, I just met you fresh out of starting it, and you started it in San Diego.
That's right.
And so I'm up in LA, and we meet in LA. But there's a lot that led up to you starting Ruth Institute. Let's get into that. But first, what is the Ruth Institute?
Okay, so the Ruth Institute is an international interfaith coalition to defend the family and build a civilization of love. And so we've become, much to my surprise in a way, but we've become kind of the full-stop shop for dealing with all the aspects of the sexual revolution, which I think are uniformly destructive, basically. And I define the sexual revolution pretty carefully in some of my writings now, which I didn't know all that in 2008. I still had to work it all out. I had to figure it out. There was just a lot of, I think that's one of the things that we really contribute at the Ruth Institute is a kind of a deeper, more thorough understanding of what's going on, which then helps everybody in their work. So I hope to equip pro-life leaders and pro-family leaders and so on. Look, this is what you're dealing with. Don't freak out when you see this or that again, because it's the same thing. That I would say that's our big contribution.
So what is the sexual revolution?
So do you want to do that?
Define that. Let's start.
You want to start with that?
And then we're going to go back to your history.
That sounds good. Okay.
I heard that. I want to.
Yes. Take
that.
So I developed really understanding of the sexual revolution during the years that I was debating on the subject of marriage, and whether marriage should be a gender-based institution or whether the gender requirement that there be one man and one woman, should we remove that gender requirement, basically, that's the debate.
From marriage.
From marriage, yeah, that's what the debate was all about. Are we going to make this a gender-based institution? Are we going to make it a genderless institution? And in the process of trying to explain what was the problem with removing gender as an essential understanding part of the understanding marriage, I came to see why people were. I was trying to answer people's questions, and I started to see some patterns, right? And so I came up with this typology, or this kind of breakdown of what the sexual revolution is all about. And the idea came to me that people, in a way, had already redefined marriage. In their minds, they had already redefined marriage, well ahead of the Supreme Court. And there are three parts to the redefinition, and these are the three parts of the sexual revolution. That's the way I break it down. Because, think about it, sexual revolution looks like this big blob. It looks like out of one corner and some other crazy thing coming out of another corner. But there's really only three things, and everything can be broken down into those three things. Well, now it's not so spooky. You know what I mean? So anyway, the first big idea of the sexual revolution is that society, a good and decent society, should do everything possible to separate sex and babies from each other. So you can have as much sex as you want without ever having a baby. Sex is normatively and normally a child-free, sterile activity, normally sterile. And if you have quirky lifestyle preferences and you want to have a baby someday, okay, fine, right. But the basic social understanding is that this is not connected. Sex and babies are not connected. So I've come to call that the contraceptive ideology. The second part of it is that a good and decent society should do everything possible to separate both sex and babies from marriage. Okay, so marriage is not necessary to be sexually active. Marriage is not necessary before you have kids. You can be married without having kids. You can be a parent without having marriage, and so on. I call that the divorce ideology, because what it's really saying is that kids don't really need their parents. The kids will be fine. They're resilient, you know. Their kids will be fine. So we can switch out as adults, we can switch out our sex partners as often as we want, and nothing bad's going to happen. So that's the divorce ideology. And then the third part of it is that that society should do everything possible to wipe out the differences between men and women. Men and women are really the same. Any differences you see are socially constructed, probably unjust. We should wipe out all those differences. That's the kind of feminism that I grew up with. That's a certain kind of feminism. I avoid the word feminism because it has so many different meanings and carries a lot of freight and so on. But roughly speaking, when I was a young woman, that's what feminism was about. But it has kind of morphed that idea of the body being somehow insignificant, you know, has morphed into, if you want to change the sex of the body, that's okay. You know, we're no longer wiping out differences between men and women. Now it's all, if you want to be different, well, that's all good, and you can reconstruct your body if you want to, okay? So at first we were looking at social reconstruction, now we're looking at physical reconstruction. But in both cases, it's a idea that the sex of the body is unimportant and we can transcend it, and that's what a good society should be about. That I call the gender ideology. And so if you go back to the whole question of the debates leading up to the Obergefell case, people had already in their minds decided that sex was a sterile activity. In their minds, they had already decided that marriage isn't anything really about kids, right? The kids don't really need their own parents. And third, we're willing to ignore the physicality of the body and its significance for both reproduction and marriage and everything. And so it's like, well, why not? You know, why not redefine marriage? You know, in their minds, they had already redefined.
For those listening, remind us what the Obergefell decision
The Obergefell
is.
decision was the 2015 Supreme Court decision that legalized gay marriage throughout the country. Okay, and I can tell you, I saw that was going to happen in 2013. It was clear that that's where we were going to end up. The Windsor case and the Prop 8 case that took place in 2013, that told me, I can see where they're going with this.
And by they, you mean so Prop 8?
The Supreme Court.
Right.
The Supreme Court, yeah.
Because the people of California, people don't remember this, but it was in my lifetime, not too long ago, the people of California voted for marriage between one man and one woman.
Absolutely. I never tire of telling people that.
They just ignored it.
Well, they didn't ignore it. They attacked it in the courts. And this is a very important thing, and this is what my book, The Sexual State, is really about. The sexual state, I lay out this typology that I just told you about. But the theme of the sexual state is that the sexual revolution is not some cultural thing. It is a top-down imposition by the elites upon society, and it has been from the very beginning. That's my position. And so you can see it there with the Prop 8, you know, that it was a mass vote, and it was not particularly a close vote. You know, I mean, we won fair and square at the ballot box.
What was the percentage? Do you remember?
I want to say 52-48. I could be wrong about that. No, I think that's about right. Because what I remember very clearly about it is it was about, I would say about 48% of Anglos, white Anglos, voted for man-woman marriage. 60% of Hispanics voted for man-woman marriage, and 70% of African Americans voted for man-woman marriage. Okay, they were all in there in 2008 voting for Barack Obama, first black president. And oh, by the way, while they were in there, man-woman marriage for sure. It wasn't even close.
And meanwhile, Barack Obama's about to flip on it and say, "I'm not for man-woman marriage."
Yeah. It's been a very interesting thing. Let's put it that way. But anyway, so and I think you can see the elite nature and the non-grassroots nature of the sexual revolution when you look at the whole trans issue now. No one in their right mind believes that there is a grassroots demand for transgenderism. That's all top down. There aren't average people going to the library saying, "Please bring in drag queens to read stories to my children." That's all orchestrated by people. That's all coming from the top down.
But would you say now there's enough hurting kids, confused kids who are, the social contagion effect is real? Little girls on the internet looking in chat rooms, transgender porn, who's indoctrinating kids into seeing this as somehow an identity, and then you have the phenomenon where now there's a way that it is bottom up in that the contagion has seized all of the young people today.
Yes, that's,
so many young people today.
Yes, that's right. And
but you're saying it started.
Yes, that's right. But it didn't start with the people. It didn't start from the people. It started from the top down. And the propaganda that has gone into the whole of the sexual revolution over the years has been enormous. And I think part of the reason things like the divorce ideology, the contraceptive ideology, how does that take root? It's clearly irrational when you spell it out the way I just did. Sex makes babies. Now, doggone it, I'm just pretty sure that's the way things are, that sex makes babies. You need to make some provision for the babies, and society has always done that and had structures for doing that, and every society has something. But the idea that you can do anything you want and nothing bad will happen, that's a very appealing idea. That's very seductive. Right? And so over time what happens is that people participate in it, and one of two things happens. Well, actually a lot of things happen, but two basic directions. One is you go down the track and it's like it feels good and it seems right, and it's easy to, kind of feed yourself from it, right? And so you continue down that track, right? The other path that happens is that people go down that track and something cruddy does happen, right? They end up in a situation they never expected, didn't want. If they had thought about it, they would be like, what just happened? I mean, girls whose contraception fails, right? They have the idea, I get to do what I want, I'm using a condom, I'm on the pill, whatever it is, and then boom, it fails, right? And they're never told that, they're not prepared for that, and now they're in a situation that they never wanted to be in, and it's life-changing to them. And then sometimes people will go, what just happened? I hear it all the time from people in divorce, right? They'll be like, if I had known how hard divorce was, I would have worked harder at my marriage. I hear that from people. So that's all.
But then you hear also there's a fad. It's sort of the thing to do to say, I am so happy about my divorce.
Right? Oh, gosh, yes. But see, that's propaganda, Lila. You got to understand that.
Of course.
You got to understand that. You will never hear an adult child of divorce sitting in front of the camera saying, I went through this and it was awful. They never get a turn at the mic, right? It's always the jolly blended family, That's,
well, how it's like such a terrible position, especially if you're a young child, but any child of any age,
right?
Because to share in
That's
any
right.
public way,
that's right,
that you're unhappy. It
Right.
feels like a betrayal of your parents.
Exactly.
And there's probably some sort of conflict in the marriage, so you have your mixed feelings, and it's devastating all in all. But you're right, there's no space for them to speak.
That's right. That's right.
I'm thinking in particular about a blogger, A Cup of Joe is her name. I don't know if you've heard about her. She was one of the famous kind of mommy bloggers of the last decade. A New York woman, young children, married, And she put out an announcement during COVID. A lot of divorces happened during COVID. You probably saw that. And she just said, we're, happily parting, we're happily parting ways, and we're going to therapy, we're working it out, but it's better we live this separate. And our kids are doing great.
Right.
Her 2 young kids, 5 and 7 or something, they're doing great. They get to go to Dad's house and watch cartoons and eat ice cream. They come to my house.
Right. And as if there's space in the family for them to say, Mom, this stinks, right?
Well, they don't have a blog where they can share.
No, they don't have a
about
blog.
that, and it certainly wasn't their decision.
And the point that you made earlier is really important, because love feels very fragile in that environment, right? And so oftentimes the kids are like, they don't want to take sides. Sometimes they can't help but take sides. Sometimes they can't regulate their emotions because they're just little kids, and their parents. Sometimes parents are preoccupied with the new problems that they have. There may be shortage of money. There may be new love interest. The parents are preoccupied, and so the kids are trying to regulate their emotions. They don't want to stir the pot any further, right? Sometimes kids will start acting out because that's what they know how to do, And so the idea that that you could have a straightforward conversation, hey guys, this isn't working. Can we stop? Can we stop this whole thing? Start over? Nobody's going to say that. And what I hear from adult children of divorce is that they don't want to talk to their parents about it, because the love feels fragile.
Meaning they don't want to create any sort of conflict between them and the parent, because there's
Correct.
so much conflict in their life.
Correct.
And they need someone to be safe for them, and they desperately
Correct.
want it to be their mother or father.
Well, so, let me kind of go at this from a little bit different angle, which is from the positive side. We're talking about the downsides and everything. But based on what I see and just observations and really reflecting on it, the love between the mother and the father is the foundation for the child's life, okay? And when that falls apart or was never there in the first place, it's hard. It's a loss from the child's perspective. Of course, they don't necessarily know it. They certainly can't articulate it. But when you think about how our bodies are put together and how we're designed by God, that the human person is really meant for love. That's really our primary end, in a way, right? And I learned that from watching my own 2 kids who had very different origins. But the love of the mother and father for each other, that's what brings the child into being in the first place, when you really think about it, right? And as that love is sustained, it's the foundation of the child's personality, it provides a platform, for the child to grow and to develop. And that's why kids are so tuned in when there's visible tension between the parents. That's why it affects the kid so much, And you tell a little kid, Mommy and Daddy don't love each other anymore, but we still love you, honey. That's why that doesn't really compute in their little minds, And of course they can't articulate it, But gee, Daddy's half of who I am, and you don't love him anymore, but you say you love me? Wait a minute, how does that even work? They can't spell all of that out, but that's a fundamental reality that's behind what's going on in their lives.
What do you say? I mean, there's probably people listening who have had to separate,
Yeah.
or they know people who have felt they've had to separate because of severe situations, abuse, narcissistic activities in the spouse and things like that. What would be your message for them and for their children?
So, I think there are situations where people need to live separately. What I would say is you really want to avoid trying to take on a new spouse, okay? Because from the child's perspective, what often happens is the child from the first union ends up feeling like a leftover when mom and dad move on, and they're now we're happy, and they have a new baby, and now that baby has 2 parents, and the first baby doesn't have 2 parents. And that, when you think about it, that's what Jesus was trying to tell people there in Matthew 19 when he said, if you divorce your wife and marry another, that's adultery. That's precisely the situation he's trying to avoid, right? Is the subsequent union while you still have a living spouse. But that's only one aspect of this thing. I think the further aspect of it that we have to think about is that the way in which we have come to view marriage, people don't view their responsibilities inside marriage in quite the same way as would be a good thing. We've become very self-oriented, very self-centered. Is this happy? Is this making me happy? Is this working for me? If you have 2 people doing that, nobody's going to be happy. In the end, nobody's going to end up being happy. And so if you start from that kind of paradigm, you're going to end up with a lot more divorce and separation. And I think that accounts for why regular religious practice, so this is now I'm going to be go all social sciencey on you here, but regular religious practice is a protective factor against divorce. And it doesn't even matter what religion it is, right? It's not about the doctrine. It's in some way about the fact that you're oriented towards the other, and not just self-gratification, And the modern world has really told everybody that, we live in a consumer society, you can have it your way. And I know as teaching economics for years, I kind of conveyed to people, consumer-based society, that's great. Everybody gets to have what they want, and the market will give you what you want. Well, that doesn't really work in the family. It doesn't really work, and there's a whole sphere of human endeavor where that it's not right to apply that thinking. And that was the subject of my first book, Love and Economics. I was really, that was back in, that book was published in 2001, and I was really trying to work through all the ways it wasn't like the market, right? All the ways it wasn't true that if everybody does what they want, an invisible hand will make it all work out in the end, because that's the way I thought as an economics professor, and I had to, really do some serious thinking about why that wasn't true. And it was my kids who helped me to figure out, and well, not so much that they helped me figure it out, but they helped me to see that it was an important question.
How? I have so many questions about what you just said, but first, you were an economics professor. We got to the Ruth Institute earlier, but the lead up to the Ruth Institute.
Right.
Walk us through that.
Well, so yeah, I was an economics professor, and when I taught at Yale for 5 years. I taught at George Mason for 11 years. When I was on the verge of getting tenure at George Mason, I said, "Honey, it's time to start a family. We should, now and only now, should we get started with this?" And I was a lapsed Catholic at that point. Those of you who are Catholic know that, you're baptized Catholic, you're still a Catholic, you're just a bad Catholic. And so I had abandoned the faith and, was doing what I wanted, basically being a full participant in the sexual revolution because, like I said, it's very seductive, right?
But you were a married participant.
And I was married, yeah, well, so there were certain things I wasn't doing anymore. But my plan was that I was going to get tenure, then I was going to get pregnant and have my baby at the very beginning of the summer, take care of the baby during the summer, go right back to work in the fall. That was my plan. And I knew, several other women professors, that's what all of them did. None of them had ever missed a day of work, Lila. They had, because that was the thing, you're supposed to be, tough, superwoman, all this kind of stuff, Well, imagine my surprise when the baby did not arrive during the month that I had set aside for it, And so we were confronted with infertility, which was about a 4-year process. And that process brought me back to the faith because that was the first time I couldn't get what I wanted by working harder and trying harder. But we resolved our infertility by adopting a little boy from a Romanian orphanage. And then we gave birth to a baby girl. And so what happened was around Thanksgiving of 1990, we put in our paperwork for adoption. And this is right around the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Okay, so, think about, well, you weren't around then. Anyway, it was very exciting. It was very heady. And people were starting to adopt from Eastern Europe. That was just opening up. So we said, oh, great, we're going to do this. We get a call in January. We have a little boy for you. He'll be 2.5 when he arrives. What do you say? We know his name. We know his birthday. He's described as being in good health. What do you say? We said, sure, why not?
Did you have any idea?
When you've been infertile for 4 years, you don't really believe the baby will come, you see. So you just say, sure, why not? And then 10 days later, I went to the doctor with a head cold, and I found out I was pregnant. And so the two of them arrived within 6 months of each other. Our son came in April, and then right around the time he turned 3, our daughter was born, right? And he had a whole host of problems that we were not ready for, that we had
developmental attachment problems.
Developmental
Who had
problems,
raised him?
attachment problems. He had been in an orphanage pretty much his whole life, and there were other couples like us in the Greater Washington D.C. area who had done a similar kind of thing, all like us. Older first-time parents, career couple, you know, and adopting these kids from mostly, at first it was Romania, and then there were some from Russia and stuff like that around that period of time. But anyway, we were finding out they all had the same set of problems, you know, attachment-related issues. They couldn't talk. Our boy didn't know his own name at the age of 2.5, if you can imagine such a thing. You have kids about that age, you know, so yeah, that's not normal. You know, that's not normal. We didn't know it wasn't normal.
You didn't know it wasn't normal?
No, we didn't know it wasn't normal. We had to be told that this wasn't normal, you know.
Oh, because he was your first.
It was our first child. We didn't know what's going on, you know. You know, so yeah, in effect, we had a controlled experiment in our house, you know, which is, what difference does it make whether you have a mom and dad in your life? And because of my social science training, in economics, you learn about systems. You know, you learn how things fit together. You know, if you change one thing over here, how does it work through the whole economy? And I just started to see that if what we were seeing with these Eastern European adoptees, if that was typical, that this was really big, what we were seeing, you know, because some of these kids, they wouldn't look at you. They couldn't converse at all, but they wouldn't look at you. You go to hug them, you want to hear something heartbreaking, you go to hug them, and they go like this, trying to get away, you know. So none of that is normal. And so that's part of the attachment between mother and child didn't take place. And if it doesn't take place and it's not corrected, the child will grow up without a conscience. That's the real scary thing. That was what we were scared.
Grow up without a conscience.
Without a conscience, because they don't care.
Now, there can be a surrogate mother, an adoptive mother, a caretaker that is like a mother to the child, but in the orphanage, your son did not have that.
Had nobody. So the surrogate, that's me.
You are the surrogate.
That's me, right?
But what was the orphanage like? I imagine.
But the point is, there's a period of time. There's a developmental window where certain things are getting done. Okay, and if nobody's there to do those things, it's very hard to go back in and put patches in. You know, and that's what we needed to do. We needed to figure out how to, you know, how for him to trust me, how for him to love me, how for him to even look at me. You know. And you know, it was a tough time. It was a tough time, but he's basically a good boy, and he turned out fine. You know, I want to say that for the camera. You know, that he turned out fine. The things we were scared of didn't happen. The things we saw happen to some other families didn't happen to us. But what happens, and this was the subject of my first book, because this really freaked me out, you know, when I really realized, you know, what was at stake. You know, in economics, we will always say, you know, that people have to keep their promises and keep contracts, and, you know, by golly, you can have a free market, you know, and people can just go through and do what they want and make exchanges and make deals, and it'll all be great. Well, if you've got people who will steal whatever they can steal because they don't care, you know, if they'll do whatever they can get away with, you can't have a free market with very many people like that. You know, it's going to overwhelm your system, your ability to manage people who don't control themselves. You know, your ability to manage that, it's going to be hard. So we learned about attachment. We learned about the attachment cycle, and you know, over time, it just became clear that what mama's doing at home is much more important than anybody's really given credit for. Oh, Lila, my goodness. See what happens is that baby cries, what do? You run check on them. You know, you take care of them, give them what they want. Well, what happens if you cry and nobody comes? What, you know? You eventually stop crying. But when you go, every time you zoom over and pick up the baby and do whatever the baby needs, the baby goes, ah, and he trusts you. He's attaching to you, you know, and he comes to see that another person is important and is the source of his life and can take care of him. And that happens naturally for most kids most of the time. It just happens in the normal course of doing what parents do. Right? That's just the normal, natural thing. But if that process is interrupted and the child never attaches to anybody, what happens is they withdraw, they stop crying, and sometimes adoptive parents will think, oh, wow, what a good baby, he never cries. Well, that's not normal. See, he should be crying, right? He should be, right? He should be, a 2-year-old should be crying, at least some of the time, not all the time.
And what's the long-term psychological impact of
The
child that
long-term
doesn't cry?
I'll give you the nightmare scenario, okay? The nightmare scenario is they never attach to anybody, and they don't care what you think of them. And so therefore, if you're not watching, they'll do whatever you said not to do, they'll just go do it. Say, you hold out your hand for them to take this hand, they'll run around to the other side, take the other hand. They don't care. And as they get older, as they get bigger, you can't keep them out of trouble. Right? When they're 4, you can pick them up and get them out of trouble. When they're 14, not so much, right? And so these are kids that kill animals, if it's really bad. And they have no conscience, so they'll just do whatever they can get away with. That's the nightmare scenario.
And that's the sociopath.
That's the full-on sociopath.
We have a lot of sociopaths today, too.
And you know what? I wrote that book. I wrote Love and Economics in 2001, and at that time there were not so many school shooters. But I knew it was coming. It's like you could sort of see, oh my gosh, this kid that we just saw at the parent group, is he going to be one of those kids? Kind of a thing. And more family breakdown, more and more disruption, and then other problems like video games and violent video games and all that kind of stuff. There are other factors obviously going into it, but we haven't fully addressed the fact that kids need to bond with their parents.
And do you think today a lot of parents are deceiving themselves into thinking, oh, they're fine, they're bonded with me?
Some, yes.
How much of that is happening?
I think there's some of that. I think,
like a willful ignorance?
I think there's some of that, Lila. I think, you can have too much careerism, and mom thinks her job's more important. One of the trends that I see, though, is a lot of moms are blowing that off and saying, I'm coming home, the heck with it. I don't care what the studies say. My kid's not doing as well as I want him to do. My kid needs me. This is the only time that he has to be 4 years old. I'm coming home. So I do see, I see a certain amount of that.
What was your take on that? You just adopted a child. You're an almost tenured professor, maybe you're tenured.
I was tenured by then, yeah.
Tenured. You have your first baby, and you've got a 2.5-year-old adopted boy who needs you a lot.
Right.
What did you do with your career?
Well, it took me a while to figure out that it wasn't going to work. I was trying. I had to abandon the idea that I was going to pop him into daycare. I had to give that up. He flunked out of daycare. This is a family joke now. Kiddo, you flunked daycare. We laugh about it. You can laugh about it when he's 30, But at the time, it was like, I'm going to have to rethink this whole thing. So we had in-home care for a while, and I tried to go part-time, which doesn't really work in academic life. You think in academic life you have all this flexibility, I can do what I want. But I was trying to do a full-time job in part-time hours. That doesn't work long-term, So ultimately what happened, Lila, I will tell you, one day, and I don't know what exactly put this into his mind, but my husband is an engineer, and we were living around the Washington, D.C. Beltway. There's no engineering in that. Anywhere in sight. There's social engineering, but no, that's not his field whatsoever, right? He's a nuts and bolts guy. He came home one day and said, I got a job offer in Silicon Valley. I said, let's get out of here. Let's go. Let's go. And so, therefore, I could leave behind all my colleagues and all the expectations and all of that, and I just, kind of turned my back on the whole thing. Went out to Silicon Valley, Santa Clara. We were in the Santa Clara area.
Born and raised, same area.
Yeah.
You know the Bay Area.
Yeah. I went to Our Lady of Peace.
Yes.
It turned out. It just turned out, Lila.
Did you do the homeschool group there?
I knew that homeschool group. But this will strike you as hilarious. I find this is hilarious inside Catholic baseball. Okay.
Totally.
Okay, totally. Because
I wasn't even Catholic, but I know about it after I became Catholic.
Yeah. So here's the thing. My husband chose a place for us to live that would take our dog. This was the criteria. Can we rent a house that will allow us to have a dog? Okay, great. So we get out there, and he picked the town. He picked the house. He's not Catholic. He doesn't care. I said, honey, I want you to find out. Call up the diocese and give them our address, and that will tell you what church we're supposed to go to. And it was Our Lady of Peace. That The Holy Spirit,
beautiful.
the Holy Spirit used my unbelieving husband and my dog to get me into the best parish in Silicon Valley.
God does that. That's so beautiful.
You know, could be coincidence. I don't know. And that's where I met your mother-in-law, right? I mean, that's where I met that whole group of people that, you know, swirled around.
It's amazing.
We didn't homeschool. I homeschooled them for preparation for their first Holy Communion, you know.
Wow.
So they made their first communion there with Father Sweeney.
So you did 1 year of homeschooling? Or no?
That's a long story. I'd rather not go into that. but I prepared them for their sacraments at home because he was in special ed and he needed a lot of special care and all that.
Father Sweeney might be a saint, right?
In my opinion, he is.
I hear
Will there be a canonization?
They're raising his cause, I think.
Official canonization?
Wow,
I don't know about that.
how wonderful.
I know. But anyway.
So then you're raising your kids in Silicon Valley, and then how long between that time and then you're starting Ruth Institute?
Okay, so that would have been, we moved to California in 1996, and I'm sitting here trying to think how old the kids were. They would have been 8 and 5, I think.
And you were continuing to work at this time?
No.
You were off work?
When we came out there, I got it settled down. As it happened, I knew the then president of the Hoover Institution, John Razian, who was a labor economist, which was my field, so he knew who I was. And I said, John, I'm moving to town, and I don't know how this is going to work out, but I'm in the market for a very part-time job. He said, let me know when things settle down. So after, I don't know, a few months, I said, I think I could give you a quarter time. I think that's realistic. And he said, this is the easiest decision I've ever made. I'll give you, here's your salary, here's a quarter of that, boom, do what you want. And that's how I got to write the first 2 books that I wrote then. And I did that while the kids were at school. But they came first. And I can't tell you what a relief that was. You know, to have it clear in my mind, to have it clear in my husband's mind, have it clear in the kids' mind. This is what comes first. You know, yeah. And I've never looked back on that.
What's your advice for working moms?
Oh, the family has to come first.
Yes.
Because it's never, you can only have one first priority. This is a mathematical certainty, people. Only one first. You know, you have to have that clear in your mind. And I had it clear in my mind, again, I suppose, because of my labor economics background. You do study earnings over the life cycle, you know. And I could see that this is a period of my life. It won't be there forever. And that, when you're thinking about it from an economics perspective, that you're thinking about money, but when you're thinking about it from the mom perspective, you're thinking like, this is going to be over like that. It's going to be gone in a flash. They're going to be grown up. I'm staying home. The heck with it, you know. And also with our boys, like, I can't outsource momhood. For this kid, I can't possibly outsource that. That's crazy. He doesn't need high quality, low cost daycare. He needs me. You know what I mean? I mean, that
Well, what's incredible, they do, and you know this, they do studies on what a mom, a homemaker, really provides economically to the family.
I know.
And it's like $200K.
Yeah, you're right. And that's kind of crass in a way, because it's treating it as if the outsourced goods are the same as the mom goods, which they aren't. You know, I mean, buying a cake from the supermarket is not the same as mom making you a train cake because you love trains, and you know, and putting your name on it, and you know, and you get to watch her, and you know, it's not the same experience as buying it from the store. It's just not, you know.
So as your kids got older, I imagine you started to ramp up your activities more, and then you start Ruth Institute once they graduated, or how did that work?
Well, the way that, there's another phase in here. There's another phase. When we were dealing with our boy, you know, trying to help him, we were in a number of different parent support groups of families similarly situated. And we realized that there was a need for trained respite providers, because the truly attachment disordered child is exhausting to parent. And I'll bet you, when we're talking about this, I'll bet you you're going to get calls from people, and I welcome these calls. You're going to get calls from people saying, oh, I've got this kid, he's driving me, and I can't get anyone to understand what I'm dealing with. Okay, it's really
And just
hard.
to clarify, these are often foster or adoptive kids, or they can be a biological kid who has a trauma, or
yes.
Could it also be a personality thing for some
all of
kids?
that, all of that. I mean, I think it is true that some sociopaths are born, I think there are some that are like that.
Some
but,
kids are just really
But it is
hard.
also true that
Yeah.
some are made, okay, that sociopaths can be made. There's actually a diagnosis called institutional autism because the kids' brains don't develop properly. If you're not doing this, see when you're doing this, you're helping the baby's little attachment center, human relations part of the brain, the limbic brain. You're helping that develop when you're going like that. It's amazing. It's amazing.
I mean,
it's all.
This is the civilization of love. I mean,
Exactly.
We could be talking right now about the evils of the sexual revolution.
Right.
We talk about that all the time on Exclusives and more. We just talked to Carl Truman about the chaos and abortion rate and all of these things. But the solution
is mama.
And people say the solution is the family, but like practical, break that down for the modern woman, the modern man. What does it look like?
Get it down. Yeah, when you hear people say that, it's a cliche. You know what I mean? But when I wrote Love and Economics, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not a cliche. This is so not a cliche, So that fits into our story because we were realizing that these children can be overwhelming to their parents. They need competent care providers. If you hire a babysitter who sits the child in front of the TV and gives them popcorn, that's not helping your little child who's been misbehaving so badly that you're ready to drop from exhaustion. You do not want to reward this behavior with that kind of a babysitter, right? So we wanted to do that, and we looked into becoming respite providers when we lived in Santa Rosa. Quickly realized we didn't want to have anything to do with the social services people in Santa Rosa because they were they were scary.
How do you mean?
They didn't know what they were talking about.
That's scary.
Yeah, I mean,
because they're entrusted to be the guides of these families, these struggling families.
When we went for the training, they couldn't even explain the attachment cycle correctly, and they were like, well, we have to be very careful for the children's safety, and so if you have rose bushes, you have to put a little fence around each rose bush, and you have to hide all of your knives, all of your steak knives, and we're like, I don't think this is not gonna work for us. So when we moved to San Diego, we encountered a couple of women who were kind of full-time foster moms. They were grandma kind of ladies, and they had a whole foster care support group, and I read about them in the paper. I'm like, I'm gonna go meet these ladies, because they seem pretty cool. These were ladies who they specialized in crack babies. They did babies. They loved having the babies, getting the babies unhooked, getting them off the drugs, and then send them back to either home or adoption or whatever. Wonderful ladies. And so under their influence, we got involved with the San Diego County foster care system, and we were foster parents from about 2003 through 2005. We did foster care. Because this was still a period of intensive child rearing for us. Our kids were a little older. But I said to my husband, now economists really talk like this. Honey, I'm home with 2 kids, economies of scale, baby. I might as well be home with 4, And so we for those 3 years, we had 2 foster kids at all times. So that was a period of our lives too. That was another season, you could say, where it was right for our family. Our kids enjoyed having other siblings. They learned a lot. We had a blast, basically. We didn't find those kids particularly challenging because of what we'd already been through. So that's perfect, right? You have this knowledge, might as well share it with more people, right? And so by 2005, we had pretty much outgrown that phase. Our daughter was a teenager. She didn't really want a 6-year-old sibling sharing a room, a kind of thing. And our son was, getting through high school. So around that time, around 2008, I said, well, I'm looking for something else to do. I'm never going back to academic life. You can't walk away from a tenured job and ever expect to be hired again. That's just not going to happen. So I decided that it was time to institutionalize myself.
And what was the first mission of Ruth Institute? And why is it called Ruth Institute?
Okay, I called it the Ruth Institute because I wanted it to be named after a person. I didn't want it to just be, the Marriage Society or something. I wanted it to be a person. I wanted there to be like a patron or a patroness. And I wanted it to be someone that had something meaningful, but that wasn't too Catholic, because I always knew I wanted it to be interfaith, that I wanted to be able to appeal to anyone, of any faith. And then one day the idea of Ruth in the Bible just came to my mind, and my mom's name was Ruth. So it all just kind of fit together that, you know, to have this great figure who is, you know, one of the ancestors of Jesus, and who put faith and family first, you know. So and Ruth has worked well for us. Everybody loves Ruth. You're not going to lose anybody over the name Ruth, like you might lose your Protestants if you named it after the Virgin Mary or something. You know, that'd probably be a problem, but anyway. So the original mission of the Ruth Institute, what I thought I was going to do when I started that on my dining room table in San Diego, I thought I was going to talk to college-age young ladies and law students, you know, college students and law students, about why motherhood was going to be a good thing for them and why they didn't have to wait until they had all their ducks in a row to get started, that it would be okay, you know, to start a family sometime before menopause. You know, it would be okay.
But it's a real problem, right? So many
totally.
women are waiting till 30s and then, or even 40s, and then they're freezing eggs that don't work, and it's bad.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
And for infertility is such a cross for so many people.
You know, I was.
How old were you when you started?
I was
try for
speaking
children?
from my experience. You know, when I conceived of that as an idea, you know, I wanted to spare them what I had gone through. You know, that was the short version.
How old were you when you had your first?
When our children arrived, I was 38.
Okay.
Because they both arrived in the same year. Don't forget. So.
And you've been trying for 4 years.
And we've been trying for basically 4 years. Yeah. And we didn't do anything fancy. You know, we had a few little things that had to be corrected, but then we let it go. We let it go. We didn't do all. I wasn't even tempted by IVF. Anyway.
What's your message for back to the founding of Ruth Institute?
Yes.
You're a college-age woman. I mean, I know we've talked to hundreds of these and thousands probably now over the years.
Right.
They're educated. They're on fire. They're very talented, doing lots of things, and they want space for marriage and motherhood.
Right.
But once they maybe marry and even start motherhood, it's this tension. But like they have all this education and all this skill built up.
Yeah.
What's your message to them?
So my message to them is that even when you're doing the things that seem to be mundane, they're not mundane. You know, it's profound what you're doing with your baby. When you're home with your baby, you're doing something amazing and important that literally no one else can really do. No one else can do it as well as you. You know, if you've got a child and and they've got problems, you take them to a specialist. That's all good to have the expertise, right? But the doctor doesn't care the way you care, right? The doctor doesn't know all that you know. And so just for a whole bunch of reasons, what you are doing as the mom is irreplaceable, irreplaceable. So that's the main message that I want to give the moms is to don't blow it off, okay? Yeah, you want to use your gifts and talents, but you know, your gifts and talents in the home, place those gifts and talents at the service of the family. That's a good thing to do, you know. And that time will not last forever. The time that you're there, you know, full time with the kiddos, that's not going to last forever. And that is exactly what happened to me. My kids moved on. You know, my husband and I are now at the point, you know, he's retired. He doesn't have to work anymore. I'm the one who's working. I'm having a ball. He's having a ball. He worked his head off for a long, long time taking care of us, you know. And so the idea that we have to be equal at every moment in our life cycle is not practical.
Equal in the same you're meaning in a marriage.
In a marriage and in public policy. See, this was a big thing in public policy when I was a young woman. It's like, you know, you want men and women to be equal. If he advances faster, if all the men advance faster than the women advance, that's terrible, you know. But the career path, women need a different career path. You know, what's a typical career path for a man shouldn't be the typical career path for the woman.
It's so interesting. How do we what does it look like to shape? I mean, I'm very blessed. I work for a not-for-profit that's highly pro-life, pro-child. So the flexibility.
And you're the boss lady.
Yeah, no, and so the flexibility is, I know, a huge privilege.
That's right.
Because most women aren't blessed with that when they have a job, you know, the way that I do. But there's a lot of women that have the part-time situation or the kind of side hustle, and so they're doing meaningful work, but they're prioritizing it under the family.
Right.
But for the many women that don't have that luxury,
Yeah.
It's seen as a luxury today when it shouldn't be luxury. I think it's a necessity, to your point.
That's right. See, here's the thing. Here's the thing, Lila. The society has been shaped by a certain vision of feminism. Okay, the feminist vision was equality, and you don't really need a man. Okay, that was the fundamental vision that they were starting with. Okay, and if that's your vision, you're going to enact certain kind of public policies. If your vision is that men and women collaborate inside the home, and we want to facilitate that collaboration, then you're not. Then your mind is going to, how do we facilitate part-time? How do we, what is an expected career path? What do we expect? The mommy track is not a disgrace. The mommy track is not a disgrace. You see what I mean?
It's incredible how the mommy track is seen as such a disgrace.
And I totally oppose that.
And even the progressive sort of pro-corporate women feminist world would say, well, no, if you want to stay with your kids, it's fine. I mean, meaning they would give a lip service to the stay-at-home mom, but I don't think and by stay-at-home mom, I mean the mother who's prioritizing children first and largely orienting her life from the home and from the point of her aspect of her motherhood, especially of young children. Right. But the society at large isn't really set up to encourage women to that.
That's right.
It's seen as patriarchal to say that as a woman who seeks marriage one day and has hopes for a family, preparing her for that.
That's right.
And emphasizing the value of that and developing the skills to be a good mother. That seems outdated. And a good wife.
And a good wife, yeah.
That's outdated tradition. That's trad wife. That's outdated tradition.
And let's go back to the earlier thing that I said, my typology of the sexual revolution, okay? If you're not sure that your husband is going to be there for you, you can't do what I just described.
It's true.
Okay? And there are plenty of women who work far longer than they want to work because they're afraid their husbands will leave them. Okay?
Or their husband wants them to work or doesn't, they're living in a way or in a place where they can't live on one income.
Well, how did that happen?
How did that happen?
It used to be that a couple of 18-year-olds could get married, find a place to live, and make it, and start a family and make it.
With the mother not having to work.
With the mother not having to work. Yeah. Right. So,
well, now there's quotas for, like in big corporation today, banking, law, certainly in tech. I mean, that's increasingly prioritizing the woman over the female over the male hire is actually seen as a virtue. So there's actually quotas to ensure that the woman gets the first chance at the job because we need more women in tech. We need more women in STEM, right? Sheryl Sandberg, lean in. We need more women in the boardroom.
Right.
What if the woman doesn't want to be there?
That's right.
Or what if she's better being with her kids?
Right. And what if she's muscling somebody out of a job
that needs to provide for his kids and wife that otherwise can't? Yeah.
Right.
So that's never talked about.
That's right.
That's not talked about. That for every affirmative action woman in whatever corporate office, she's likely muscling out an equally qualified man who could be providing for his family and giving his children the benefit of their mother.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we're not allowed to talk about that. But I can tell you, as an economist, I will just say, we always taught this in economics, that the free market is very flexible. The free market is very good at giving consumers what they want. And if our wants are twisted or distorted or evil, the market will satisfy them just the same. Okay? And so what's happened to us, Lila, is that the whole economy has shaped itself around abortion, contraception, and the sexual revolution generally, right?
Wow.
Okay, so think about it. In order to the entry fee, you could say, this is economist talk again, the entry fee into the professions is delayed childbearing.
Yeah, the egg freezing is a benefit at a lot of corporate offices.
Exactly.
They will give you eggs, freeze your eggs, give us your entire years of fertility.
That's right.
Push papers at an office.
That's right.
Make the corporation money, and then when it's almost too late, here's some eggs.
Some frozen eggs that who knows what shape they're in. Who knows what we've done. But you see, the competitive pressure is such that the person who does that is more likely to advance, right? The person who puts career first is more likely to advance. That's the person who's going to say, gee, this kid's a problem, I'm going to have an abortion, and she's going to move ahead of the woman who says, I'm not killing this baby. I don't know how I'm going to provide, but I'm not going to kill this
Well,
baby.
it's so pernicious because this is happening in the real world, of course, but they're glamorizing it in media, in TV.
Yeah.
I was just criticizing, it was the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Her husband goes off with this woman who's another career woman, becoming a doctor, gets her pregnant. The career woman has an abortion because how can I do this and be a career woman?
Right.
But it's done in a way, there's a tragedy to it, but it's done in a way like, well, this is the way things are.
That's right.
This is the way things are.
Well, you need to understand that that's propaganda.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
And everybody, I think one thing we do well at the Ruth Institute is to help people identify propaganda, right?
We should get you on some React videos.
What?
Jennifer? We call them React videos.
Oh, okay.
We started doing this. We get little snippets from media, entertainment, and we make comments about it.
Oh, okay. All right. That's cool. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, you could do that all day long, huh?
Oh my gosh. And I feel like my team sends me these clips and I watch them, I'm like, again? Like, this is so, it's just incessant.
Yes.
Grey's Anatomy, all these TV shows and movies. I mean, they're just so anti-marriage, anti-child, anti-family. It's the ideologies, the pro-contraceptive, pro-divorce, gender ideologies.
So here's what I would say is the real contribution of The Sexual State, the book The Sexual State, is that when you see that these three ideologies, every one of them is impossible. You can't make a whole society around the idea that sex and babies are unrelated. That's just not going to fly. You cannot build society around the idea that kids don't really need their parents. Come on. And men and women actually are different, and you can try to suppress that all day long, and it's still going to pop up. So what you're seeing is that if you're committed to doing those things, you have to have a lot of power to do the impossible, and you have to have a lot of propaganda to keep it propped up, okay? If you're organizing society around nature and reality, that will reinforce itself.
You don't need the propaganda.
You don't need
a full month of June called Pride Month where you put shirts with bathing suits with tucks in them for toddlers in the front section of Target to shove this ideology, a brutal ideology, down the throats of everyday people.
That's right.
You don't need that.
And you don't need, there's so much propaganda to tell women it's okay to not want your baby. When women, I remember seeing this, I remember feeling this. You take your child to daycare and tears running down your face. And you see the other women, tears running down their face. The baby's crying, the mommy's crying. But we suppress that. We got to tell her it's okay, you'll get over it. You'll feel better after a while. It's not going to bother you after a while.
Well, and eventually the child does stop crying, right? I mean, they kind of give up.
Right, but the point is, you have to be continually tamping down the natural things that are coming up, right? The natural feelings, the natural reactions that are just going to flow. You got to, whack-a-mole, constant whack-a-mole.
What's your message to women who are struggling with instincts for their child, to care for their child, and society's telling them, don't worry, that's not a big deal, or what's your message to them?
I would say, if you,
like the mama bear instinct.
If you feel that your child needs you, your child needs you. Okay. If you are married, and your husband is telling you, you're smothering him, you should probably listen to that, right? But if the TV's telling you your kid's fine, no, not so much.
Or not TV, Instagram would be.
Yeah, whatever, right.
Yeah.
But inside the home, you and your spouse can balance each other out a little bit, right? And this happens all the time. I don't know about you, but this happened to me all the time, that I would be, and this was shocking to me because I had been a dragon lady in the classroom. I mean, my students at Mason were scared of me and stuff. And now I have these little kids, and I'm like, oh, honey, stop yelling at him. You're upsetting him. I never would have expected that I would feel that way, right? But, my husband usually was right. And the child's discomfort isn't always a bad thing. Mom wants to zoom in and make the child feel comfortable. Dad wants the child to behave. Well, when they're toddlers, there's one balance between those two things. When they're teenagers, there's a different balance between those two things. Mom and Dad gotta, do a little yin and yang thing going on here. You got to do a little back and forth and receive what your spouse has to say.
It's something. So gender differences.
What?
The different gender differences.
What?
The different. That there is a different way that men typically parent versus women.
You could say that.
They're not interchangeable.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that, because today it's amazing. Like I think I tweeted. I don't know. I tweet this maybe once a month just for fun, but it's true. Men and women are different. Or children deserve a mother and a father.
Yeah. Yeah.
Genius comment, right? So original that I say that.
Wait,
but
you're taking my stuff.
I know. That's my job. I just gotta put it. Hugh Hefner was the pamphleteer for Larry Later. I don't know if you've heard that. Where he says he was, but for the sexual revolution. But my job is just to take all the good stuff and just put it out there as much as I can. But what are the differences between men and women, and why do children need both a mother and a father, even if they're not biological, but they're adopted?
Right. Well, okay, so first of all, we have to say we're speaking in broad tendencies here. This is not you could say it's hardwired in the sense that there are average differences and there are essential differences, you could say. But there's going to be overlap in personality types and stuff like that. So please, people, don't get hysterical. I don't mean to be hysterical. But broadly speaking, moms want their kids to behave, or moms want their kids to be comfortable, and dad wants kids to behave, broadly speaking, okay? And it's easy enough to get into conflict over that at different times, right? But if you start from that premise that each of you has something to contribute that's necessary, the child needs both, right? And so if you start from that premise and can trust your spouse, can really authentically trust one another, you're gonna be much better off as a couple, and your children are going to be much better off because they're going to have the benefit of both sides of that equation. Now, when children are little and dependent, they need much more of their mama, right? But as they get bigger and they need to be introduced to the world, they need to behave, right? And they need to perform. And dad becomes more important, okay? And I also think something I've never seen this studied, but something I've seen, that when moms have to be the disciplinarian, oftentimes they don't respect their husbands, okay? If you leave it all to your wife to do that, not only are your kids going to suffer, but her respect for you may not be there. So, step up and do what needs to be done. But and the other thing that has been studied is the physicality of men's play. That men will rough and tumble with the kids. And this used to be a thing. We were talking about gay marriage and all that stuff. This got to be almost a cliche. Well, little kids need their dad doing roughhousing and rough and tumble play. And it got to the point where the people who were saying that gender didn't matter or sex didn't matter, they would like poo-poo that. Like, we've heard this all before. This is not a big deal. Okay, you've heard it all before, but it actually is a big deal. Because what happens when a bunch of boys are pushing and shoving and tumbling and roughhousing and this type of stuff. Well, if somebody gets hurt, dad stops the game. Okay, dad stop. Okay, that's it. Stop. Separate. And everybody calms down, and only then, after everybody's calmed down, recognize that this has gone too far, then you can start again. Then you can do something. So what's the boy learning? The boy is learning to manage his body. He's learning to manage his aggression. He needs to learn that. Who's going to teach him? If not the biggest, most powerful person in his little world, his daddy. If daddy doesn't do it, who's going to do it? And who knows this? Who knows this? Single moms, when their boys get bigger than they are. Okay, I've given versions of this talk, and I can see the ladies just sitting there, and they'll come up and they'll say something to me. I'm the custodian of my nephew, and he's 14, and I can't control him. He doesn't respect me. What are they supposed to do? You know what I mean?
Rough.
You know what I mean? It is objectively difficult, and you can say all you want that some women are up to the job and so on and so forth, but it is objectively difficult if your son is bigger and stronger than you are, and you don't have a backup. That's just a fact. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer.
Oh no, there's so much there to explore.
Yeah, there is.
We need to go for another.
Yeah.
We need to do this again because there's so much. And you've written now. How many books have you written?
6 books in all.
Jennifer. Okay. Wonderful.
2 of them are co-authored.
Okay.
101 Tips for a Happier Marriage. Is
I haven't read that, and that looked great. I said I'm going to pick that one up.
And then there's 101 Tips for Marrying the Right Person. Those are co-authored with my colleague Betsy Karakist, who was the very first employee of the Ruth Institute before there even was a Ruth Institute. And then Love and Economics, which we've been talking about. Then a book called Smart Sex, which really explores, I wrote that in 2005, that's really exploring how our sex lives prior to marriage make it so hard to get married and stay married. That's really what that's about.
Because if you're sexually active before marriage, you're less likely to stay married once married. You're more likely to divorce.
That's a fact.
And if you cohabitate, people say, well, let's try out the car before we drive it. Let's cohabitate before getting married. You're more likely to divorce than if you don't cohabitate.
Exactly.
So get all the studies in that book.
Trying to get that.
What's it called? No.
That one was called Smart Sex.
Smart Sex. Okay.
Finding Lifelong Love.
We'll put the links in
the
the bio too.
And then there's another book that's a collection of my essays. It's called The Sexual Revolution and Its Victims. And it has a picture of Marilyn Monroe on the cover.
So sad.
Because
Yes.
she's the sexual revolution
Yes.
and its
the
victim.
ultimate victim.
And its
Yeah.
victim, right?
It's so true.
Right. And then The Sexual State is my most recent book. So that's what we've been talking about that a bunch as well.
I know we've got just a little time left here. What do you think the future holds now? How do we build a civilization of love with all the chaos? Because in some ways the chaos has accelerated.
Yes.
In the last few years, there's spots of hope. Roe v. Wade is overruled now, and I think there's resurgence happening of our ideals in places. But where do you see us going over the next decade?
Well, it depends on us. It depends on what we do.
I love that answer.
It depends on what we do. I mean, I would answer you in this way. Every 500 years or so, civilization shakes itself apart, and things get restructured and reshuffled. And we're deciding right now who we're going to be for the next 500 years. So I would just say, everybody, listen, get on the playing field. If you're not working with Lila Rose or with me or some other organization that's doing something, I don't want to hear you sitting on the sidelines kvetching. I mean, do something, because there's plenty to do. So how things are going to go depends on us and what we choose to do and not do.
I love that answer. And Jeff Bezos, his ex-wife, just donated $275 million, their most historic gift, to Planned Parenthood.
Oh,
so our opposition,
nice?
It's just, you get a divorce and you go and donate, a fraction of your multi-billion-dollar estate, but to the biggest abortion chain. So we've got our work cut out for us, but thankfully the truth does prevail. And thank you for being an example
thank you.
to women like myself, as well as an inspiration in the work that you're doing, and an educator to help guide us through the mire to the future.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's an inspiration for me to see, what a great thing you've put together here, and your organization, and this great studio. I'm truly inspired by all of that too. So
thank you. What's next for the Ruth Institute?
We're about to open our studio. We have a little studio. It's about half this size, I'll say that, but that's okay. We've been doing interviews for the last few years. We call it the Dr. J Show. That's where my version of this.
I love it.
But I do it over Zoom. So we're going to start having in-studio guests, probably once a quarter or something like that for the time being.
Are you settled in Louisiana?
We are very settled in Louisiana. Okay. With the part of Louisiana we live in is...
I can't persuade you to come back to California.
Not a chance.
Oh gosh.
Not a chance. Louisiana, South Louisiana is a very Catholic area. It is very Catholic. I call it the Catholic buckle on the Bible Belt. And we have a great bishop in Lake Charles and a lot of great people, and it's just, no, I'm not. I don't have any plan to leave. I hate to say never, because things happen. A lot of unlikely things.
We've got you out here today.
But my health is good, and I'm able to travel, and of course you can do all sorts of things on Zoom these days. So I think things are looking good for the Ruth Institute, because a lot of people are discovering us. We have content that is evergreen. People still watch videos we made 3 years ago because the message is the same. The message is still true, and so we're accumulating a lot of material that people can still benefit from. But the fact that it's old doesn't really matter. So.
It's amazing work. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you, Lila.
Excited to see all the great things to come.
Thanks.
Build the new civilization of love.
Together.
Thank you.